So in this project, we're aiming for a set of perfect prints. But in order to get perfect prints, we need to make as near perfect negatives as we possibly can. If you take all the tones of grey that in an image or a possible image, and we can take them through from a solid black, which is film base plus fog, so known as film base plus fog, and that will give you a solid base. The plus fog is because there is a slight amount of chemical fogging on all the film base, so it's not pure see-through film, there is a certain amount of fog there. And then we take that through to paper white, or otherwise known as DMAX, maximum density. It's an infinite number of tones. There's no separation between them. Ansel Adams, though, devised a system called the zone system, where he separated out those tones. So he took the 0 as film base plus fog, and then he opened up one stop to get 1, and one stop to get 2, one stop to get 3, until he got through to DMAX, which is his 10 on this one. The original Ansel Adams zone system only had 10 zones altogether, so the last one was zone 9. But he devised that system so that he could work out how to make perfect negatives and pre-visualize what was going to appear on the print. So the way it worked, those are all the tones. If you imagine a pot of paint with all the tones of grey added in, and you mix them up and you poured it out, you'd get something which is a mid-grey. So you start with black, you with white, you mix them all together, and all the tones together would give you a mid-grey. And that mid-grey is known as zone 5 on the zone system. So the light meters we use, all the light meters we use, all the handheld meters, not just what we use in the college, but I mean what everybody uses, is designed to give enough negative exposure to render a zone 5 in a print. So when you either use a reflected reading or an instant reading, we'll talk more about that in a minute, you are looking for a zone 5 in the print. Ansel Adams made pictures that were beautifully toned with a beautiful range of tones in them. So if you look at this image of Snake River by Ansel Adams, you can see a full range of tones in there, and it goes through from that paper white, which is DMAX, where the sun pops through the cloud, right down into the film base plus fog, which is in the foreground, where he's actually probably shaded that down to make it darker still, so the attention is taken to the river, which is then taken to the horizon and then to the mountains. But he did that by reading zones within the scene and placing, so some zones will fall and then others were placed. So Ansel Adams used a spot meter, and a spot meter will read a very fine area of an image, 1 degree of an image. It has a lens and a viewing viewfinder, so you can look through it and you can place the spot, the 1 degree spot, on the point where you want it. We'll talk more about how Ansel Adams actually made his pictures in a minute, but let's just talk a little bit more about light meters, because a spot meter is a very precise, accurate way to read light. Traditionally, cameras had center-weighted meters, and most of the cameras that we use are center-weighted, or have, in the digital cameras we use, and have a choice. Center-weighted means that it reads the whole scene, but is concentrated on the very center of the image. So there's more information being taken from the center than there is from the rest of the image, but it's all taken into consideration. A matrix meter takes readings from lots of different areas in the scene and mixes them together to give you an average. So it's like a center-weighted average meter, but it's mixing up all the different spots in the scene. Two ways of using the light meter. Can either use reflected light metering, and that's what you normally use if you use the meter in your camera, and it's possible to use when you use the Sekonic meters that we have in the college, or your own handheld meter. A reflected light reading is reading the light which is falling on the subject and being bounced back to the camera. So you're taking a reflected light reading from the camera position pointing towards the subject, and it's the light that's been reflected off the subject that you're reading. An incident light reading means you're going to read the light which is falling on the subject. So you're not interested in the light that's being bounced back to the camera, you're interested in the light that's fallen on the subject, and that gives you a good average. So you would put a dome across to diffuse the light on the normal light meter to make it into an instant light reading. And you take your meter to the subject and point it back towards the camera, and it reads the light that's fallen on the subject. So for Ansel Adams, his main principle was to expose for the shadows and then develop for the highlights. So what he would do is he would take a light reading from the deepest shadow that he wanted to see detail in. And he knew from experience and from tests that if he placed that area on a zone 3, in other words 2 stops darker than what the meter is saying, because the meter is saying it's going to be a zone 5, if he decided he wanted that to be a zone 3, he'd shut down 2 stops to make that a zone 3. And that will give him a deep shadow, but with some detail. What he'd then do is he'd look at the highest highlight in the scene that he wanted detail, and it might not be the highest highlight he's got in the scene. That we could let that go to D-Max, but it might be the highest highlight that he wants detail. Might be in the cloud or something like that. So then take a reading off that. Now, given that he had a reading from the zone 3, what he's going to see now is where that light falls. If it falls beyond a 7, because 7 is the highest highlight that you can get detail in, if it falls beyond a 7 to an 8, he's going to underdevelop slightly the film. It's going to underdevelop by 1 stop, which will bring it down to a 7, because development really doesn't do very much to the shadows. The shadows, if there's no detail in the shadows, then it doesn't matter how much more development you give it, you're not going to get any more. So it does very little to the shadows, but it does a lot to the highlights. Exposure does more to the shadows. So I'm going to test some of this. What I'd like you to do is I'd like to take some pictures. If you've got a film camera with you and you can come in and process the film, or you can process the film at home, I'd like you to do that. What I'd like you to do is to get 3 sheets of card. I'd like you to get a grey sheet, a white sheet, and a black sheet. And I want you to take a light reading from the black sheet of card and take a picture of it. Make sure that you don't include anything else in the picture when you take the reading. Make sure the light is even. So overcast sky is a good idea, but don't get your shadow in it. Take a reading off the black card and take a picture. Do the same for the white card and do the same again for the grey card. So you take a reading, use that reading to take the picture. Then what I want you to do is make sure that you're on manual. Take a reading from the grey sheet only and use that reading to photograph 3 sheets again. So you should have 6 pictures now. You should have a picture of the black sheet that you've used as the light reading from, a picture of the white sheet that you've used the light reading from, one of the grey sheet, and then that grey sheet reading, I want you to rephotograph the black sheet and the white sheet again using that reading. Does that make sense? We'll talk about it later if you're struggling with that. That's activity 1. Activity 2 is a little bit more difficult, and it does require you to use a film camera. So if you haven't got a film camera with you, don't worry, because we'll do this when you come into the college. But if you're at home and you've got a film camera, you can get on with this. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to get a piece of white toweling or a white towel and pin it to the wall. I'd like you to make sure it's in soft, even lighting, overcast sky, or indoors, so that there's no shadows or strong light. I'd like you to use a light meter and take a reflected light reading from the towel. Now remember, that should give you a zone 5. So what you should get is a towel which is grey, mid-grey, zone 5. What I then need you to do is to set the camera 5 stops under that reading. So take that down 5 stops, so you're making it darker. And then I want you to take a picture of it at 5 stops under, and then open up 1 stop at a time until you get to 15 stops altogether. So you go over the 5 and go all the way through to the 15. Then I need you to develop the film. So if you're in college, you can come develop the film in the college. If we're doing it in college, you can develop the film straight after in the college. If you're doing it at home and you've got development facilities, then do that. And then I want you to make a set of contacts. And that's the end of that little session.